Felix Rohatyn, Ambassador Rohatyn. He is the head of Rohatyn Associates. He's also the former ambassador to France, and he also helped New York City avoid bankruptcy in the 1970s. Ambassador Rohatyn, thank you very much for coming in. Appreciate it.
Pleasure to be here.
State and local finances, are they the kind of problem that a company like Allstate is underscoring by their move on muni bonds? Is this a big problem?
Well, I think it is a big problem, and of course they're making it bigger by taking these actions. Although you can't blame them for trying to protect themselves.
Why? What's the big problem that exists?
The big problem that exists is that the states or the local governments don't have the budgets to maintain their pension funds, so that you have all these thousands of people who are beginning to worry about whether their pension is going to be okay. And cities, especially states, that are constitutionally prohibited from filing for bankruptcy and who otherwise will have enormous budgetary problems in terms of making cuts or raising taxes, none of which is particularly feasible these days.
So then why do you think that rates for municipal bonds, for example, have stayed so low? You'd think that it would be priced in, that risk would be something investors would be worried about.
Yes, well, that's true, but there is a lot of protection in that whole municipal bond area, because a lot of people, including myself as a matter of fact, buy municipal bonds that are pre-refunded, and so that the money to retire the bond is already in escrow. And that particular bond is I wouldn't say risk-free, but is very, very low risk. Now, the combination of that plus the tax-free nature of the interest makes the bond a perfectly respectable bond, unless you believe that everything else is going to go to hell. But I don't. So that is essentially why. But what is more, in my judgment, the government ought to not wait for things to begin to crumble, but begin to talk about some kind of something like the Reconstruction Finance Corporation that Roosevelt had, to essentially finance the cities and the states and allow them to service these bonds on a normal schedule.
Do you think that we get to a situation where states will be allowed to run budget deficits, will be allowed to have imbalanced budgets?
A state is not allowed to run a deficit. On the other hand, a state is not allowed not to run a deficit. So you have this situation, which is, I guess the state can default, which is no better. If anything, it's worse. But I mean, look at California. Look at New York State. We're going to have New York and California, competing as to who can run the bigger deficit. That's a terrible thing for the people who live there. It's a terrible thing for the economy of the country.
What can be done, do you think?
Well, what can be done is come up with a plan to retire a lot of these bonds with federal credit and other things that you can do to restore the credit of a state. I mean, but I hear people talking of estimating the deficit of New York State in 2 or 3 years, because you won't really know it until then, of staggering natures. And as I said, you've got it in California, and I remember when we were dealing with New York City, which was a very small, relatively small thing compared to what you're looking at here. There was a dearth of facts. We didn't know what the numbers were. The state, luckily, the state was in very good shape, and the governor was very courageous, and we were able to use public pension funds to help us refinance the city. And we had banks that were not bankrupt at that point, and bought some of this paper. But it was a very close thing, and at that time, I remember there was a Western summit, economic summit near Paris, and we were about to go bankrupt. We were about 4 or 5 days from bankruptcy, and the French president Giscard d'Estaing and the Chancellor Helmut Schmidt of Germany went up to President Ford and said, with a little coaching from us, naturally, you can't allow New York City to go bankrupt. You'll have a global dollar crisis. And 2 days from bankruptcy, we were able to refinance the city, because the German Chancellor and the French President told our President, you can't do that. Now, that was then, and this is now, and these numbers today are probably going to be, I don't know, multiple of what we were dealing with. And we don't have the, in New York State, we don't have the kind of governor that we had then in terms of experience. And as I said, the state was in much better shape at that point. The state was very strong, and now the state is very weak. We don't even know that.
Talk about the U.S. dollar, if you can, for a moment, because you mentioned the dollar in the context of state and municipal finances. Is the dollar in a perilous state as well?
Well, the dollar has been very weak, as you know, and that's been welcomed by some business people because it makes exports cheaper, which is true. But I personally, I think weak money is, in the long run, not good. It's bad for the country. It's bad for the people. And a strong dollar would be, in my judgment, much better in terms of investment in this country, in terms of all kinds of other things.
All right. I want to thank you very much, Ambassador Felix Rohatyn. Appreciate you coming in and sharing your thoughts with us about municipal, state finances, and the dollar. Look forward to having you back.
Fine.
Thank you.
Say your prayers.
Coming up